Welcome back to yet another installment, a long-awaited installment of Why Nobody Plays. In today's video, we're talking about yet another casual Yu-Gi-Oh card that some players seem to think is competitive, despite the fact that after this video, you'll learn why it's not as good as you think. In today's video, we're talking about the newly reprinted Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This was in the Soul Burner structure deck and also in the upcoming Dual Power, which is coming out tomorrow. In today's video, we're going to talk about the reasons that casual players seem to think Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is good, but also sort of talk about the reasons that it's not that great in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is a level 3 fire zombie tuner monster with 0 attack and 1800 defense. Its effect goes as follows. It says during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated that includes any of the following effects, you can discard this card and negate that effect. It either negates something that adds a card from the deck to the hand, special summons from the deck, or sends a card from the deck to the graveyard. Pretty much in every single case where you will be touching your deck in a game, you can use Ash Blossom to stop that. You can only use this effect of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring once per turn. Now this is the type of card that falls under the same category as several other cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that it's a hand trap. It's a card that's meant for when you go second to stop your opponent's plays before you get a chance to actually set up your own board. However, when we compare Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring to another very similar hand trap, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, suddenly Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring doesn't look as good. And I know that some casual players will maybe play Ash Blossom because it's a cheaper alternative to Ghost Ogre. Ghost Ogre has a couple reprints, but it's still a little bit more expensive than the common version of Ash Blossom. And I know whenever you're looking at cards that do similar things, but one's a little bit better, if that better one costs more money, it sometimes is a little bit harder to objectively sort of analyze it. But let's take a look at Ghost Ogre and see how it's different. There are a few ways. Now, just like Ash Blossom, it's a level 3 and a tuner monster with 0 attack and 1800 defense, but what makes Ghost Ogre so much more powerful is that if you notice, Ghost Ogre not only is a hand trap, but also you can send it face up on the field to the graveyard when your opponent uses something to destroy that card. Now this is better than Ash Blossom in a few ways. Ash Blossom can only be used in your hand, and it doesn't even destroy what you use it on. Ghost Ogre, on the other hand, can not only be used while in your hand, but also can be used on your field. You can normal summon this card and blow up something your opponent uses, and yeah, it destroys the card, unlike Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom might temporarily deal with something, but Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit permanently gets rid of it to the graveyard unless your opponent has a follow-up revival spell. And while this might not come up so much, it is worth mentioning that Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit is a psychic monster, not a zombie monster like Ash Blossom, which means it has synergy with the very popular Emergency Teleport card. And we know Emergency Teleport is popular because it's limited, and only popular cards end up on the forbidden and limited list. So Ash Blossom isn't even good enough to be able to special summon itself from the deck, but with Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, you can get it right to the field, which once again is a very good move because unlike the worst Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre can actually send itself to the grave from the field to destroy something your opponent activated. But another area where Ash Blossom really falls flat, and to some degree so does Ghost Ogre, although that one's a little bit better because it destroys the card that you're activating it against, the fact of the matter is that attack points in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are everything. You hear this time and time again from the game's most competitive players. When people pick up a deck, they're not really looking at the effects or the synergies, they're only really looking at how much attack points they can put on the field at any given time. This is why historically decks like Blue Eyes and Dark Magician tend to be the more competitive strategies, just because it's so difficult for most decks to deal with a 3000 attack monster or a 2500 attack monster. Because many hand traps have 0 attack, it really puts them in an awkward position, but this is why many people believe that Skullmeister is the best hand trap ever released, because Skullmeister has at the very least 1700 attack points, which matters because when you're comparing two cards that are virtually identical, I mean, yes, they do slightly different things, but when you're comparing two cards that are both hand traps, Ash Blossom and then also Skullmeister, the fact of the matter is that most competitive players, when they're looking at two cards that are very similar, they're going to go with the card that has more attack points. That's just good game logic. So many cases, people will play 3 copies of Skullmeister before they'll ever think about adding a single copy of Ash Blossom to their main deck. But let's say you're already playing Skullmeister and you want extra hand traps, so you try to fit Ash Blossom into your deck to stop a few searching effects that maybe exist in the metagame. Well, here's the thing, that's still not a good idea, because hear me out, what would you rather do? Negate one search effect with Ash Blossom or negate all search effects with Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird, another hand trap out there, is a card that negates all search effects for the entire turn, which is so much better than Ash Blossom. It's not that difficult. If someone asked you if you wanted to stop one card or all the cards, every single smart duelist is going to say all the cards, and for that reason, everyone's going to play Droll and Lockbird before they ever play Ash Blossom. In this way, whenever you're deck building, you're going to play 3 Skullmeister, you're going to play 3 Droll and Lockbird, and maybe after those 6 cards in your deck, if you still need something else, you're probably still going to look towards Ghost Ogre before you ever consider playing Ash Blossom. But maybe the right option is just to play no hand traps at all, because while they are powerful in the right context, especially Skullmeister and Droll and Lockbird, in many cases they're simply too easy for most players to counter. Things like Call by the Grave and Solemn Strike just directly negate every single hand trap out there, so many competitive players have stopped playing them entirely in favor of regular trap cards, which are much harder to deal with. However, even if you were going to play Ash Blossom, even if you were considering it, one of the biggest issues with the card is that it is a hard once per turn, which means if you use Ash Blossom, even if your opponent negates it with something like Solemn Strike or Call by the Grave, you can't use a second copy in your hand. That is extremely bricky, and not every hand trap has that. In the case of Skullmeister, in the case of Effect Failure, and even Infinite Impermanence, none of those cards are hard once per turns, which means if your opponent stops them in some way, if you have that extra copy in your hand, you can activate them immediately. And this is just another case where Ash Blossom really shows its true colors in terms of not quite being as good as the other hand traps out there. But I've done enough talks about Egyptian God cards and Chaos Max Dragon to know how this discussion might look to some more casual players. Here's the thing, even after everything I've said, if you still think Ash Blossom is a good card, allow me to blow your mind. Now, what if I could tell you that there's a card that is better than Ash Blossom and better than Droll and Lockbird, and its name is Mistake, and it has a ton of benefits over both of those cards, and it's probably why it's one of the most competitive traps in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Mistake is a continuous trap card, which is the best type of trap card because it just stays on the board forever, and while it's face up on the field, neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand. Now, in this same argument of Droll and Lockbird and Ash Blossom, Mistake sort of comes in and just demolishes both of them. When we were talking about Ash Blossom and Droll, I was talking about how much better it is to negate every search card instead of just one search card, but Droll and Lockbird unfortunately is restricted to only the turn you use it. But Mistake is forever. It just stays on the field until your opponent deals with it, which is really tough because there are a variety of different ways that you can protect it while it's face up. For example, cards like Imperial Custom and Dark Bribe are really good at protecting your Mistake from being hit by any of your opponent's back row destruction. When you compare these cards to things like Call by the Grave and Solemn Strike, suddenly Mistake looks a lot better because it can't be stopped by all of that monster effect negation that's running around in 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! But perhaps maybe the biggest thing holding Ash Blossom back from being a truly competitive card isn't anything to do with the card itself, but rather what it can't do. For example, some of the game's most powerful cards don't actually interact with the deck, which is all that Ash Blossom negates. Things like Monster Reborn and Soul Charge and Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon and even Magic Cylinder are all very powerful and popular cards in the current metagame that Ash Blossom doesn't affect at all. When your opponent uses a card like Chaos Form to summon their mighty Chaos Max Dragon, what is your Ash Blossom going to accomplish in that situation? In those situations, you'd much rather have cards that can actually deal with what your opponent is summoning rather than having a dead 0 attack monster in your hand, which is going to look pretty stupid when your opponent summons a 4,000 attack Chaos Max, which, if we're being completely honest, is way too good for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyway, and probably will end up on the next ban list. Maybe a better sort of comparison is more important. Things like Monster Reborn for cards like Dark Magician or regular Blue Eyes White Dragon are simply too much for Ash Blossom to handle, and this is why you don't see many competitive players using the card at all, not in their main deck, not in their side deck. Cards like Skullmeister and even things like Mirror Force or Magic Cylinder are so much more powerful when you're looking at a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame. That being said, if all you can afford is Ash Blossom from your Soulburner structure deck, definitely don't feel bad about playing it. I'm sure in some format, in some era of Yu-Gi-Oh! In the future, maybe it'll see a little bit more play. Droll and Lockbird wasn't very good when it came out, so there's some hope for Ash Blossom being competitive in the future. Anyway though, hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video about Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Don't don't forget that today was April Fool's, so I hope you didn't get baited too hard throughout the previous 10 minutes of today's video. I'll see you later. Goodbye.